What I want to share with you this afternoon starts with a warning, and it talks about, "Hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of God in their foreheads." 7 verse 3. Now, as we're getting close to that time, you can expect the earth to get hurt. It's being hurt with fires in California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, Arizona. There are hurting of the air in the sky. Okay, there's all kinds of things that are happening now, but the power is still on. It hasn't gone out yet. When the electricity goes off, it's going to create a time of trouble that people haven't known in America for a long time, because they're not prepared to, like our pioneers were 200 years ago in this country, when everybody knew what to do. So we are facing a coming crisis. Ellen White writes about that in Great Controversy, and in this little book called Christian Service, which tells us how to get ready for that time. And she says, God will do a work if we will furnish him the instruments. Now, what are the instruments? Our hands, our voice, our heart, our time. Isn't that what God wants to work with? Could the angels do it better? Are they more efficient than we are? Stronger? Wiser? How many years have they lived? Who knows? Thousands of years of experience. Not just the devil's angels, but God's angels, mighty in power. But he wants to use us to bring healing to sick people in the end of time, to bring food to the hungry people, and we'll be tested on it, as pointed out in Matthew chapter 25, where the king comes and examines his servants to see what they've done, and says, we're going to divide you up like the sheep and the goats, one on the right hand and one on the left. And God's people that are commended in the judgment said, when did we help you? We didn't do anything for Jesus. He says, oh, yes, you did, when you went to the prisoners and you visited them, when you went to the sick and you ministered to them, when you fed me when I was hungry and brought me water when I was thirsty. Inasmuch as ye have done to the least of these, ye did it to me, Jesus says. So we are judged not by what we know, but even more by what we do. Are you with me on that? Yes. So that's why we're told in volume 7 of the Testimonies, page 62, that we have come to a time when every member of the church should take hold of something. Do you know what it is? Medical missionary work. Every member. That's not just any are doctors or physical therapists or nurses or social workers. It's every member of the church. Now, that doesn't mean we all have to go take pre-med at La Sierra, and I'd even have a little warning to some people that go to certain schools, or to go take a medical course or even a nursing course. If God calls you to that, we need nurses and doctors and all. But every member of the church, that's not obviously an option. So what is it? It's the use of simple remedies that God's people are going to know about and know how to use. Now, some people say, well, I'm part of this pyramid sale or multi-level marketing thing, and I've got a little bottle of some magic medicine that's vitamins and herbs and a mystery potion that nobody knows about except a few people, and we're going to make a lot of money if we sell that to everybody, because they all become dealers. Is that medical missionary work for the end time? Not in a time when no man can buy or sell, for sure. And so that isn't what he's talking about. He's talking about something we call New Start at Weimar, or the 8 remedies in Ministry of Healing 127. Pure air. By the way, is the air pure? No. I had a hard time seeing the mountains when I came in the other day, and we drove from Ontario over here to Colton, but the air isn't crystal pure. Sometimes it is, but pure air is what God wants us to have. Where is the purest air found? In the mountains and in the country, yes. And then she talks about sunlight. But if you ask dermatologists, what about sunlight? They say, oh no, that's very dangerous because it's going to give you cancer. God says get out in the sunshine. Now, I don't mean sunburn. I don't mean strip down and go out to the beach and lie there till you're red as a lobster. But sunlight does something special for your immune system, for your bones, for your teeth, for your mind. Doesn't it? Don't you feel better when the sun shines and you get outside for a while? Pure air, sunlight. Abstemiousness is a word Ellen White uses that we don't use today. And what does that mean? That means temperance, or abstaining from harmful things and using in moderation things that are good. Even a good meal like we had today, could you eat too much of it? Some of us could and some of us couldn't. We'd get full and we'd stop, and some of us don't want to. But I have seen people go through a church dinner and with a plate piled high like that, a biggest plate they could find, and eating about 3 or 4 times as much as anybody else. It's hard to do here. You know why? Because the wisdom has touched the pastoral staff, and they have some ladies standing along the line giving you 1 scoop of this and 1 of that, and rationing it out so everybody gets some, and it makes it harder to just, as we say, make a pig of yourself. So we don't want to overdo even good things. Abstemiousness. And then she talks about rest. I hope I can keep you awake for a few minutes today, because after eating a big meal, you tend to want to sit down and go to sleep. But rest is important. Exercise, and it's harder in a city environment. How many of you walked around this building after lunch? Nobody. I have seen people walking on some Sabbaths just after a meal. Does walking after a meal help you? Yes. It really does. If you're diabetic and you take a stroll, just a short walk for 15 minutes after a meal, the sugar goes out of the blood into the muscles. And the muscles cells say we need some of that energy, so they open their little doors called receptor sites, and the glucose, the sugar from your meal, including your starch like the tortillas and the breads and the pasta, they go into the muscle cells. And so the blood sugar doesn't go up, up, up. It goes just a little curve and then into usefulness. So that's important. That's exercise after a meal. And then exercise, proper diet, the use of water, and trust in divine power. And that you won't learn at most medical schools. I will say that Lomas Linda still makes no secret of the fact that it's a faith-based institution and believes in the healing power of God. There is not this emphasis on natural remedies like there was in the early pioneer days. That's true. But there is a trust in God. And even in a crisis, almost everybody turns to God. Amen. They even say in times of war, there's no atheists in the foxholes, because when the bullets are whining over your head, you tend to want to pray. If you're in an airplane and the airplane engines quit, do you think there's more than one person that would pray? Everybody starts praying. And they may not know who they're praying to, but they all believe that there's a higher power. And so that's very important. But in what I found out in this little book called Christian Service, that God has assured us of success in using his remedies. And here's what it says. We need to understand better than we do the mission of the angels. It would be well to remember that every true child of God has the cooperation of heavenly beings. Invisible armies of light and power attend the meek and lowly ones who believe and claim the promises of God. She even talks about cherubim and seraphim and angels that excel in strength, stand at God's right hand, all ministering spirits sent forth to minister to them who shall be heirs of salvation. When I was a student at Loma Linda, I was in the pediatric clinic, and a grandmother brought her little boy with a bad cough and a high fever. And we determined by listening to his lungs that this little boy had pneumonia. And I was a student, but I thought he should be admitted to the hospital. But they wouldn't put him in the hospital because he didn't have something that you're supposed to have when you go through the admissions process, and it was an insurance card. This little boy was from Chicago, and he'd come to California to visit his grandma, and he had no insurance, and his parents were in Chicago, and only his grandma was here. So we had to treat him and send him home. And I remember going home that day kind of angry about the system, that here's a poor little boy from a minority group in Chicago, maybe majority in Chicago, I don't know, but he was untreatable at what I considered at that time the best hospital in California. And so I went home and thought about it, and I lived down on the other side of the freeway where the poor people lived in a little house that in San Bernardino, yeah, it was that we'd bought the little house for $6,000. Now that's not a lot of money, and you don't get much of a house for that. My next door neighbor was an alcoholic. The others were Hispanic people that had a great lot of children, but he drank and wasn't a very good father either. And we were down there where the poor folks lived, and they lived even farther into that community. So I decided to go over to the house because I had the address and see if we could help them in the home. And I had never given any hydrotherapy treatments in a home before. My mother might have done it when I was a little boy and sick, but I couldn't remember. And I had one teacher that had gotten me interested in that, because I knew that in the old days, Loma Linda had a hydrotherapy department. And yes, and so I went to the house and I said, "Have you got any towels?" And she said, "We have one towel." And it was hanging in the bathroom, so it was been used a time or two for people bathing, but that was their only towel. They had one. "Do you have any kettles?" "We have one kettle, and it's full of stew." And it wasn't a stew that I would probably eat, but we had to do something, so we got every dish and bowl in the house, and we poured it out into there. And they had, you see, they weren't wealthy people. They had very limited resources too, but they had one towel and one kettle, and we wrung that towel out in some water and wrung it out. You know, two people can make it almost dry, put it in the kettle with something underneath so it didn't stay in the water, and it steamed it. And what were we making? A fomentation. A fomentation. And the grandma, she was kind of nervous about this whole idea because it looked hot and it looked like it might burn the little tyke. And she was watching us, but we wanted her to watch because we were teaching. Put it on his chest and then took it off and steamed it up again and rubbed him in between with a cold cloth because they had a washcloth, and we gave him hot and cold treatments, and then explained to the grandma that she should do this at least twice a day and continue. And 10 days later, that little boy was well. Amen. And I got to see him. And when she brought him back to the clinic and I got to see him, he jumped up on my lap and sat there, and Grandma whipped out a camera, in the days when it had film in it and all, and click, and took a picture and sent me one of me with my first hydrotherapy patient. But I was learning that God can do supernatural things with natural remedies. And I want you to get some experience and practice at that. I don't have time in just our afternoon to give you a class in that, but I know there's people here that know how to do those remedies, including your pastor and some of your team of medical missionaries here in Colton. And when you do, you don't promise that I'm a healer. This is faith, and it's healing, but it's not like faith healing in the Pentecostal sense, you understand. It's natural remedies used in accordance with God's direction that will produce supernatural results. And in a book called Medical Ministry that I learned to appreciate years ago when a student here, I read a statement that our people should become intelligent in the treatment of sickness without the aid of poisonous drugs. And it's there too, but in Medical Ministry 227, she says, drug medicine is to be discarded. On this point, the conscience of the physician must ever be kept tender and true and clean. And that means we must become educators. We must, you might say, sell people on a better method, because God will bless that more. And that's what he wants us to use, to have more faith in him. An example was Jesus when he healed the man born blind. What did he do for healing that man? Did he send him to the Department of Ophthalmology and have him have eye transplants or a cataract removal or lens implants? He made some mud and put the clay, on the man's eyes. Now, I never saw any ophthalmologists do that, to be honest with you. And what did he make the clay? How did he moisten it? He spit on it. I mean, talk about a strange natural remedy. Ellen White comments on it in the book Desire of Ages. Jesus made use of what he had on hand, and he didn't countenance the remedies of the time even, but simple remedies. And then he said, go wash. And the man came back, and what happened? Seeing. And for that wonderful miracle and for the testimony he gave of who healed him, he got disfellowship from the church, excommunicated. And his parents, they were going to throw them out, so they were quiet. They didn't admit what happened to him, except they knew he'd been born blind. But you see, God's remedies are designed to give him the glory and not the human instrument. Now, people that are skilled at surgery often are, there's a debt of gratitude from a patient whose life was saved that is appropriate. I mean, they say, thank you, doctor, you saved my life. I've had people tell me that, and I always, one finger goes like this. I say, it was God that saved your life. Maybe he used me to make a diagnosis or a remedy in time, but it was God that saved your life. We should always turn any praise that comes to human to give it to God. Because if it weren't for him, you couldn't remember your own name. Much less whether to use an herbal tea or a vitamin, you know, or a food or a fruit. So this is very important that we give God the glory. In Isaiah 42, verse 8, he says, I am the Lord, that is my name, and I will not give my glory to another or my praise to graven images. So remember that, whatever you do. Secondly, when you minister to somebody in their home, just let them know, I don't know everything about this. You may need to get a good diagnosis from a doctor or have a blood test or an x-ray or something like that. But here I'm sharing with you something I've used and it's helped me and it's helped my family, and give it a try. You don't have to make powerful claims for it, this like a cure-all. You say, this will help you. And then whatever treatment you administer, especially hydrotherapy, have a little prayer with them. Lord, bless this. Do something more than what it seems like this ought to be doing. And I've seen that, for example, in Belize. The water in Belize was never hot. The warmest water was what we'd call lukewarm. But people that took hot and cold, you know, in a lukewarm water and a cooler water, they got the same remedy and relief that we get up in Oregon when we use water with ice cubes in it and water that's as hot as you can stand. You see, that's the interesting thing. God will bless if you're doing your best. And I want to encourage you that, because we need a whole army of laborers that are trained to be medical missionaries. Now, with that said, I want to share with you some things about water treatments that I've learned recently, and some Ellen White references to that, and I'm going to put that up on the screen for you. So I'm going to step aside, and you can still hear me, and I'm sorry if I'm back to you. I don't like to turn my back on anybody, but you might want to move over here so you can see what's on the screen. That would, then my back won't be to you. Can you see okay? All right. So I will stand over here then, and this is sort of a Cadillac of a hydrotherapy tub. We don't have one like that. We just have a regular tub, and probably you do too. If you're remodeling your bathroom or building a house, put in a long tub, like 6 foot long, not one that's so short that you're all like this, because you can't relax in a hydrotherapy when you can't stretch out, or you can only sit in it. So that's just an illustration. Now, in Ministry of Healing, page 237, Sister White writes, in health and sickness, pure water is one of heaven's choicest blessings. Its proper use promotes health. It is the beverage which God provided to quench the thirst of animals and man. In other words, water is far superior to Gatorade, and even more superior to Coca-Cola, or even lemonade. There is a sugar-free lemonade now that you can get that's sweetened with stevia, which I think is a good sweetener, a natural plant. But it's a beverage to quench your thirst. So when they ask you, what do you want? Say, I'll have a water, please. And drink how much? A glass a day? Is that enough water for an average adult? No. Three glasses if you're not sweating, maybe in the winter. 4 or 6, 8. Yes. Okay, there you're getting warm. Now, do you need 2 gallons of water a day? No, because if you drank too much water, you dilute out your sodium and some of your other nutrients, and you can get overdose on that too. Now it says here that drunk freely, it supplies the necessities of the system, and what does it do? Assists nature to resist disease. Another reason to drink water is more than quenching thirst. It's assisting nature. We call this flushing out toxins. or getting rid of poisons in your system. And then she writes, the external application of water is one of the easiest and most satisfactory ways of regulating the circulation of the blood. Regulating the circulation. When you put your feet in warm water, where does the blood go? To your feet, and decongest the head. Can help relieve a headache from a congestion type headache. So it's adjusting your circulation. If your hands are ice cold, then you need to put them in warm water to warm them up, but you'll warm your whole body that way. How interesting. So it's regulating the circulation. You probably have read this, but in 1918, over 100 years ago, there was a flu epidemic that went around the world after World War I. And it started on a military base in Kansas. It was called the Spanish flu, but it didn't start in Spain. It started in Kansas. And then it spread to another military base, and then they shipped all those soldiers over to Italy and Spain. But the Italians never wanted it to be named after them. They didn't want it to be called Italian flu, and for some reason, you'll have to ask people that are long gone why they did it, but the Spanish took credit for it. So they called it Spanish flu, and it killed over 18 million people in the world. Way more than any epidemic to that time. Now, in Southern California, Paradise Valley, Glendale, Loma Linda, we had institutions called sanitariums. And the word sanitarium is still in a medical dictionary. It's an interesting word. It comes from a sana, which means to heal, and terium, like an institution. So it's an institution for the promotion of health. And my medical dictionary, where I learned all kinds of new vocabulary words, spelling words and all, it says this name was coined by Dr. John Harvey Kellogg to distinguish institutions operated by Seventh-day Adventists from those that treated mental and tuberculosis problems. In other words, it's the only word in the dictionary that has the name Seventh-day Adventist attached to it. And I think that's a marvelous thing. So this name was a Seventh-day Adventist term. Dr. Kellogg wanted a new word that was different than sanatorium, so he changed 2 letters, and a man who was a patient of his by the name of Funk, who you've probably heard of the Funk and Wagnall's dictionary. He was one of the patients at Battle Creek. He said, nobody's ever heard that word. He said, Dr. Kellogg said, put it in your dictionary and the whole America will know next time you publish. So he did that. And so when I was a student, somebody said, well, the sanitarium program is dead. And I said, really? I found that word in the dictionary. I said, maybe somebody says it's dead, but they were in Jesus' day. Some people thought they were dead, and he said they're sleeping. And I said, well, it made us to be resurrected. And so that's where sanitarium came about, and hydrotherapy was world famous. Dr. Kellogg taught a man named I skipped the name, but he went to Denmark and started the Skotsborg Sanitarium, and that became famous all through Europe, treating all the wealthy people and the leaders of the countries. So she says a cold or cool bath is an excellent tonic. Warm baths open the pores and thus aid in eliminating something. What is that? Impurities. Do we need to get rid of impurities? Yes. Not just in our brain, but in our blood. Both warm and neutral baths soothe the nerves and equalize the circulation. So she gave the beginnings philosophy of that. Now, why isn't it used more? And here is what Sister White says on the next page. But many have never learned by experience the beneficial effects of the proper use of water, and they are afraid of it. Have you ever met somebody who's afraid of water? I don't mean just afraid to go swimming. One lady I was studying the Bible with for about a year, my wife and I, we were going to their home, and we studied for a full year and finally came to baptism. And she said, I'm afraid to be baptized because when I was a little girl, somebody pushed me down under the water and held me down, and I thought I was going to drown. And I have never learned to swim, and I've been afraid of water ever since. Okay. So thank you. So we said, well, you know, God says that you can be baptized, and if he says so, I think it'll be safe for you. And the river at that time of year it was in August, had warmed up some from the snow melt, so it was warmer, but it had gotten shallower. And when I waded out in the water, it was only knee deep. It really wasn't deep enough to really do baptism without somebody laying down flat. So, but to help her, we had two people there, one on each side, and we were making sure that, you know, she was secure and safe. And this lady that we baptized, that was 7+ years ago, for some reason she got derailed in her Christian experience and didn't come back to church until last Sabbath. And I had seen her at a funeral I was asked to conduct for the man she had lived with, and he had died, and his son came and said, will you speak at his funeral? And I said, well, yes. And then when I walked in the door at the Elks Club where it was being held and met all kinds of people I didn't know, I saw her there, June, the lady I had baptized, and she says, Dr. Hansen, thank you for coming. And they handed me the program, and they said I was the officiating minister, and I didn't know it till I walked in the door. But she said, I want you to know that I'm coming back to church. Amen. And last Sabbath, she says, I'm going to be back, and I'm going to be there. So God is in the business of reclaiming people, Amen. Pulling them out of the mire, as it were. And so what it says here, many have not learned. And then it says, water treatments are not appreciated as should be, and to apply them skillfully requires work many are unable to perform. To do something skillfully, what do you need to do? Practice, practice, practice. And that means practice makes perfect. You know, get it better and better. And you can do that if you are willing. And then it says, none should feel excused for ignorance or indifference on this subject. There are many ways in which water can be applied to relieve pain and check disease. Now, I was starting to tell you about the flu epidemic. In our sanitariums in Paradise Valley and Glendale and Loma Linda, during that flu epidemic, not a single patient died. When they were dying all over the world and in hospitals all over this country. We used hydrotherapy, and the regular hospitals didn't know or have the facility to use hydrotherapy. And where hydrotherapy was used for complications of flu, which was mostly pneumonia, we didn't lose a single patient. Wow. And I thought 3 years ago, when COVID epidemic came, which was another kind of flu, you know, another respiratory illness, and what were our hospitals treating with a ventilator? They'd put them on a ventilator and pump air under high pressure into the lungs. Then a doctor in New York found out that what they needed wasn't increased pressure, but they needed increased oxygen concentration. And at that time, no hospital in America, except where he had influence in New York City, were increasing the oxygen, you know, turn it up so that it was more like 80%, 90%, or 100% oxygen, rather than high pressure which a ventilator pushes into your lungs. And they were saving the lives of people. But what I was recommending to the patients I saw was hydrotherapy, which had to be done in the homes. And I didn't lose a patient either. Now, I wasn't treating like critical care, the most serious cases, but they didn't get to the critical care if they started early with hydrotherapy. And I want to, because an epidemic is coming back. Yeah. You all know that they haven't given up on scaring people with new vaccines and new epidemics. So you see, even before COVID was in our vocabulary, they already had the drugs in the testing process. The only problem was all the animals had died that were experimental, the gerbils and the mice and all. And so they had to only pass it on to the humans without confirmation that it had saved the lives of the little critters, the little animals, which made us the guinea pigs, the experimental subjects. So we're told that all should become intelligent in its use in simple home treatments. Now, I mentioned this sanitarium as an institution for the promotion of health. That's the definition from Dorland's Medical Dictionary. I'll skip over that because I explained that already. So here comes Dr. Kellogg, who was a student living in Ellen White and James White's home when he was a young man. And they helped sponsor him to Bellevue Medical College, where he got at that time the best education you could get. But there's the institution he started, which is bigger than Loma Linda Hospital today. And he built, it was the largest building in the state of Michigan when they rebuilt after the fire. But Kellogg took on the meat industry with some posters he published. He said, "A man that lives on pork, fine flour bread, rich pies and cakes and condiments, drinks tea and coffee and uses tobacco, might as well try to fly as to be chaste in thought." He always got after the industry. They didn't like him for these posters. But I want to share with you something today about a new finding on hydrotherapy. And I told you about this. It's called heat shock proteins. And I didn't know about these even 5 years ago. So I've never shared it here before. Heat shock proteins are specific proteins that are made when cells are briefly exposed to temperatures above their normal growth temperature. And when we use fomentations, they are warm, but they don't burn people. If you burn somebody, you haven't done it right. You've heated them too much and haven't protected the person. In fact, you should tell them, if this gets too hot, let me know, and you lift the fomentation and you flap it in the air, or you rub your hand on their skin to wipe the perspiration, and you'll save them from getting a red spot or a burn. Heat shock proteins are in all plant and animal species that have been studied, including humans. You'll see it on the internet if you Google in those words, but the writings are very technical. I've tried to simplify it a little bit. They're a group of stress proteins that protect essential cell components from various types of harmful damage. These protons have been remarkably conserved. This is from a scientific study throughout evolution. We don't believe in that. But in almost every living cell. In other words, God made them in the plants and in the proteins, in the humans and in the animals. And the name comes from their production in Drosophila. Any entomologists here that know what Drosophila is? That's the genus of a fruit fly, the little ones that bother you when you have your bananas and peaches sitting out in a bowl in the summertime. That's what they found first, these heat shock proteins, but they're present in the cytosol, which is the cytoplasm, the part of the cell, the mitochondria, the endoplasmic reticulum, and the nucleus. In other words, these heat shock proteins are on every part of a cell. And they're expressed in response to elevations in temperature, but also in response to non-thermal insults, such as friction or exercise or even cold friction or cold stimulation. They're induced by moderate stress to protect the organism. So that's the introduction to heat shock proteins. Do you like the idea so far? Yes. It's something God made, puts in every cell, and we knew there's lots of proteins floating around, but we haven't known much about that until recently. And now here's the physiology of it. A non-lethal increase in temperature for a cell, let's say it's 98.6 or 99 degrees Fahrenheit. If you increase it to 100 or 101 or 102, is the cell still alive? Yes, it's still alive. It speeds up its metabolism, but it's still going strong. If the cell goes up to 120, that's too high, and that cell will die. We call that heat stroke if it happens to a person. And so the heat shock proteins inhibit apoptosis. Apoptosis is as a cell going pop, the death of a cell. The only cells we want to go through apoptosis are cancer cells or bacteria cells. If they go pop inside you, it helps you. But if normal cells burst, it's like an overinflated tire. If it goes and pops, we call that a blowout. Then your car stops. It ought to, at least. So they provide cells with thermal stability if stress reoccurs. In other words, there's a memory in these heat shock proteins. So if you had a hydrotherapy today, but you weren't quite well, and you had another one tomorrow, the reaction would be even more enhanced. It would be better the second time than it was the first time because of the memory of these proteins that can do better if the heat comes back, which is why we give a series of hydrotherapy treatments rather than just one, and if you're not cured, well, it didn't work. See, it's not that way. So there are also proteins in the cell called chaperones. Now, I hope you know what a chaperone is. If you were a teenager and you were going out to a social occasion and your dad said, I think we ought to send a chaperone. I don't know if any of you had moms or dads like that, but I did. And what was that chaperone there for? To spoil your evening? Or to make sure you make sure something happened that shouldn't happen, and that you got home safe at a certain time and met the curfew. You understand. So if a cell has a chaperone, it's there for your good, not for your harm. And they call them chaperones, which is an interesting word. I hadn't thought of it for a long time. Prevent irreversible aggregation of unfolded proteins and assist in restoring their native structure or degrading of denatured proteins. Now, I want to explain that because I know that's a little technical for Sabbath afternoon. If you take an egg and you boil an egg, you crack it open, and what's it look like? It's like a clear gel with a yellow blob in the center, right? We call it the egg white, but it's not white yet. It's clear, and the egg yolk, right? Okay, now let's say you drop it in water before you open the shell, and you boil it for 3 minutes. Then you peel off the shell, and what's it look like inside? The egg is truly an egg white now, right? You all know how to boil an egg, I'm sure, even if you don't eat them anymore. But you know that protein is the egg white. And the egg yolk is mostly fat and some vitamins and some B12 and things. But the egg white has been denatured protein. the boiling of the protein has unfolded all its structure. So it's all sticky now. It's lumped together as egg white is, rather than runny. Do you understand what I'm talking about? So if you take a protein, like let's say you run a fever, you have flu and your temperature goes up to 104 or 105 degrees, and some of your proteins in the body have been unfolded. They no longer have the three-dimensional shape that's useful for an enzyme. So you've ruined your enzymes. And you take the heat shock proteins from the hydrotherapy and they refold the misshapen protein and put it back together normal again. That's what it's supposed to do. And I say, praise God, this is a miracle, but it's in the physiology of creation. So here's some diagrams that can explain it. If you take a folded protein, that would be a normal one. But you go through the destruction of it and it gets misfolded like all these little lines here. And it comes in contact with the heat shock protein. And instead of the cell dying, the cell gets repaired and put back to normal. And the interesting thing is that these heat shock proteins can even work in the brain, on the proteins in the brain, to improve the function of the brain, which has to do with thinking and action and healing from a stroke and healing from other kinds of paralysis or traumatic head injuries. And where hydrotherapy, which has been discarded because it takes time and personnel and isn't so cost-effective or lucrative, and it needs to come back because you can actually bring healing to people that were looked like hopeless individuals. So the regulation of the heat shock proteins helps put these things back in normal shape. And most people know that there's this helix formation of DNA and RNA. They've learned that through all the propaganda on COVID vaccines. And when they're out of shape, they don't work like they should. And I think I'm going to go to the next one, which is a little better and not so fine print. So what they do is the stress of an illness, like a fever or a virus, that takes a normal three-dimensional shape of a protein and unfolds it and makes it ineffective again, will take those denatured proteins, like the white of an egg that's been boiled, and put them in contact with heat shock proteins and run them through and put them back in the folded shape again. I think that's absolutely fabulous, that it can help heal a liver, it can help heal your kidneys, it can help heal your heart muscle after a heart attack, it can help heal the brain after traumatic injury, and you don't have to heat somebody until they're miserable. You just do the intermittent hot and cold of a hydrotherapy treatment, or a brief steam bath for 10 minutes and then a cold shower, and you're on the way to healing the body. And you don't even have to know how it all works any more than when you eat tamale or a taco. You don't have to know how all that works either. You just know you feel better and you've got more energy. Okay, so what we're talking about is restoring the normal protein enzymes in the body and the structure of the cell. Now, in the brain, you have the, let's take a stroke, for example. This diagram represents a stroke where you have the part of the brain that was damaged and lost its circulation, like a blood vessel blocked, and then around it is an area where the brain has been damaged. Like you have a shadow and then part of a shadow. We call it the umbra and the penumbra if you're shading from the moon, for example. And so the heat shock proteins work primarily in the part that has been injured but not destroyed, which would be around an area of cells that died. We don't yet know how to rejuvenate dead cells, except by the power of God. But around it has to do with the recovery of a stroke, maybe the restoring of speech, or memory, or vision, or use of arms and legs. And part of the brain has been hurt, but not damaged irreparably. And over a period of months, you might get your functions back. So in the cell, these heat shock proteins are put in contact with the damaged proteins, and they're restored to function again. I want you to have more confidence in the Creator, as well as the remedies that He made. And now these heat shock proteins acting as chaperones. And it's too fine print for you to read, but the idea is that, again, the cell gets healed. Now, the philosophy behind the jab for COVID is not heat shock proteins at all. It was like generating spike proteins, which were harmful proteins, hoping they didn't hurt you and maybe might help you. And yet they found out, and I have the data on this, they found out that the more of these shots that were given, which are called boosters, as you know, I've got one report for women that were given these shots and then found out that their heart beat faster when they stand or sit up. Maybe some of you have had this symptom. It's called orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. If you're a nurse, you'll understand that, but POTS is for short. And they found out that the more of those booster shots they got, the more when they stood up or sat up, their heart would go faster and faster and faster. And we call that a panic attack. But it was the side effect of getting these booster shots. And then children, they didn't get the rapid heartbeat. They got inflammation of the heart called myocarditis. And myocarditis is inflammation and of the heart muscle or the sac around the heart called the pericarditis. And after getting the injections, both seizures in children and myocarditis increased. And that's why some teenagers and young athletes have died from sudden death. And they say, we don't know what happened, but it was on the rise. I don't mean just average kids. I mean athletic champions and professional football players, like a man named Hamlin, who was tackled in a football game a year and a half ago, and he had cardiac arrest. He stood up, took 3 steps, and fell over, and his heart quit. And they were fortunate enough to have paramedics on the sidelines. They ran out there and started doing CPR. And I don't know if you saw that. You probably don't watch that kind of game on TV, but the ones that did see saw 2 teams all kneeling around the little group in the center that were doing CPR. And what were they all doing kneeling around this fallen comrade? They were praying. That was 9 minutes into the first quarter of a professional football game, and they took him to the hospital, and then they said that it was because he got a hard blow to the chest. But I'll tell you a little secret there. Football players wear protection over their entire chest. Their shoulder pads go a little down the back, but way across in the front. And he was protected there, and the tackle that day was what I call a soft tackle, where they just hug each other and fall over, you know. It was not boom and he goes flying. The only people who have ever had their heart quit from a hard blow to the chest is a baseball player that gets hit by a fastball at 100 miles an hour right in the sternum, or a hockey player that gets hit by a puck going 100 miles an hour or more, and it hits him at the vulnerable spot. But that's what they said it was. But just a few days before, he'd had his COVID shot, which they required of all the team. And so they put him in the hospital for a week on a ventilator while he's fighting for survival. And at the end of the week, they extubated him. And you know what the first question he said was when they pulled it and he could talk? He said, "Who won the game?" Which shows what was going on in his mind for a whole week. Who won the game? And the doctor pointed his finger at him and he said, "You did. You're still here." Which was a great answer, I thought. And then a month later, they were interviewing him and they asked him, "What do you think happened?" And he got sort of a funny look in his face and he said, "I'm not allowed to say." Which is an interesting answer that makes you think that maybe he knew more than he was saying. And it wasn't a hard blow to the chest at all. It couldn't have been, even though at first that's what they all said. So myocarditis in young people, and they're trying to protect them against a disease that doesn't really hurt them very bad at all. So don't have your teenagers or your children get these kind of COVID vaccinations. I'm not saying anything about their protection against tetanus or polio or killer diseases. That's a different subject, and the chemistry is totally different with that. But that's myocarditis. Now, when that injection was coming out, doctors were rewarded handsomely for promoting it. They would get $250 from the company or the government or both for every newly injected person. And so doctors that would inject 75% of their patients, they could end up with $250,000 profit from just promoting it. Now that's the first time that has ever been done as an incentive for doctors pushing any kind of drug. I mean, the salesman come around and he gives them a few samples and he says this is a new treatment that's passed the government and they have approved it, but they have never rewarded them so handsomely. That could even be called ulterior motives for giving a product and fraud. And because if the pharmaceutical company gives me a stethoscope for promoting their products, that's considered unethical, much less a monetary incentive like that. Now, hospitals were treated even better. They were given by the federal government at least $38,000 for every person that was diagnosed with COVID in the hospital, which is why for a whole year, nobody died of anything else. They all died of COVID. Even if they had a motorcycle wreck or fell out of an airplane or, some other major injury, a gunshot wound, they all had COVID because they got that incentive, which means that it pulled the whole medical system into prevaricating in their record keeping. And during that year, nobody died of flu, which makes you wonder. How could it be a major killer for years and then all of a sudden disappear? So I just throw that in for your consideration. And I have no political ambition in that regard. Now, let's go past the chaperones. Here's the summary. The summary of this is that heat shock protein is to prevent both newly synthesized chains of abnormals, proteins, and disassembled ones. And the high temperatures and other stresses that affect us, they deprive us of oxygen, make it more difficult for proteins to form in their proper structure and cause some already structured proteins to unfold. So the heat shock proteins are induced at the high levels to deal with that problem. There's three kinds. These little cartoons show you. One is like a nurse taking care of a baby. That's the heat shock protein healing the cell. Another is like the maintenance department, bringing in the tools to repair the damaged protein. And the third is like the Secret Service that's there to destroy the invader, like the bad disease germs, and kill the invaders and preserve the cells. So God has built all that into our system that we call the immune system. And it's induced and enhanced and multiplied with hydrotherapy. Skillfully given, a series of treatments that'll make a new person out of a sick person. And you've got to have this in your armamentarium. You know, people are storing up all kinds of weapons to protect themselves. This is one of the most important ones, and I call it a home hydrotherapy kit. I have at home a duffel bag, about like this, a good-sized duffel bag, and it has basins and towels and washcloths and fomentation cloths and some activated charcoal and some Epsom salts and enough of a kit that I could go and give a treatment or teach a seminar in just what I can carry with two handles. And I'd encourage you to have that too. If you want, I'll be glad to send down a list of well, I probably have it on my little flash drive to print a page for you of what would be needed for a home hydrotherapy kit. Would you like that? Yes. Okay. I will try to do that for you before I go. Yes. Yes. We have a question around the corner here. I'll repeat it to you. So.
Can we receive the benefits of this heat shock therapy by turning the shower on cold and hot, cold and hot?
Yes.
Does that work?
Yes. The question is, can we receive the benefit of heat shock proteins from hot and cold showers? You want to get, you don't get it over your whole body at the same time like being in a bath, but you can turn around and turn it on. Modern shower nozzles are designed so they can't overheat the water and scald you, so they usually go up to really hot and you can tolerate it by moving around. But then when you get out, turn it cool. Yeah, you may not at first be able to stand ice cold, and in the summertime, the cold water isn't all that cold anyway. In the winter, it certainly is. But turn it to cool and close the pores. And you won't need a cup of coffee to get going in the morning with a hot and cold shower like that. But it will turn this on, and it'll do it for the muscles and for the internal organs the same.
Same repair. Like
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah, it works good. Thank you for asking that. Okay. So what happened to the mission in our healthcare takes more therapists' time. Do you know when you're giving a hydrotherapy treatment, you can talk to people about Jesus, His coming, the diet they should eat, the health message? You got a captive audience. You might as well share something useful or even a promise of healing. It's less remunerative. It may not pay you anything. You might say, well, I'm just a layperson and I'm not able to charge you for this. I'm not, it's my interest in you. It's gratis. Drug prescribing is easier. Just pop a pill. People are looking for quick cures without a necessity for change. The whole population has been brainwashed that way to expect that health care is their right, and they will wait 6 hours in the emergency room. And then some of them turn around and go home because some of them have an accident comes in and is more urgent than their concern. So, but it's our mission to show the advantages of using natural remedies, to learn how to use hydrotherapy with skill and wisdom, and to publish data that shows its superiority, and bottom line, to give the glory where it belongs to God. And when you finish a treatment, you can do it at the start, but I tend to do it at the end of a treatment. You have a little prayer that God will bless and bring healing. One time I was asked to teach this on 3ABN, and my classmate, Dr. Warren Peters, he's in charge of preventive medicine up at the university now, but at the time he was at Heartland College as their physician, and I was giving him the treatment. And of course the cameras at 3ABN are these great big cameras, and people were taking it from all angles, and I was getting caught up in the treatment explaining it, and then he whispered to me, he said, "Richard, don't forget to pray. Don't forget to pray." So we wanted the people that were watching 3ABN to also see that that was part of our protocol. So that's what I wanted to share with that. And I think I'll stop there because you might have some comments or some questions that I can round out our discussion. And I hope this has been helpful to you and interesting. So what was the name of the protein? Heat shock proteins. So when you do further study on it, remember those 3 words. Yes, brother.
Can all of these things be put up on a website somewhere that we can have access to?
Well, some of these diagrams I took off the internet from medical articles that were explaining these things. Okay. So they probably, I can't just pass them out, but I can pass out a sheet that I've put together on having a hydrotherapy setup and some basic things, just a list of them.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. As a preventative, how often would you do hydrotherapy? Every day, a hot and cold shower.
Yeah.
Or if you're coming down with something like a virus, a hot bath if you have a tub you can do, and heat up your body with a mild fever therapy treatment. Raise your body temperature a degree or 2 or 3, but not so hot that you're getting dizzy. And then drink extra amounts of water when you're doing hydrotherapy. But every day, I think a hot and cool shower is the basic thing for preventive, along with exercise and drinking water and eating a good, healthy menu. Now, who else? Yes?
What treatment can be used to activate the heat shock protein neurologically for the brain?
Okay, that's a good question, because we're told that the head should be kept cool. So you don't put intense heat over the head and try to heat the brain that much. I would do what we call a general hydrotherapy by heating the body, either in a bathtub or with hot packs and a hot foot bath. And my book, Get Well at Home, has the essence of that in it. And the hot foot bath heats the body generally. And then a hot pack to your back and to your chest will heat the core, and basically on the forehead I'd leave a cool cloth. But the blood heats up, and so the blood goes to the brain, while at the same time you're not over-stressing the person's to get confused or get exhausted. Yes?
So I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
So if we want to get your book, where can we get that book?
Get Well at Home is what it's called.
Where can we get it?
You would need to call my office,
Okay.
because my receptionist or secretary mails those out.
Okay.
And
So we have your number, or can you leave us your number that if we want to get it?
You know, I didn't do a very good job of preparing this because I didn't put all that stuff on like some people do. It's just put Clinic 1, letter CLINIC 1 at emeraldwellness.com. Or if you Google in for our clinic, just put Emerald Wellness, those two words, and it will come up on the top. In Cresswell, Oregon, near Eugene.